Well, I think about that often.
as stupid.
Yeah, I think about that a lot with, every once in a while that realization dawns on you when you're just kind of sitting around, be like, oh my God, like I'm embarrassing myself by like putting myself out
I
there,
think I feel it
like
every day.
I'm ritualistically humiliating myself as we do this every like, bi-weekly. But then I think like, like nobody cares, dude. Like nobody cares until they do, really. So like,
It says every once in a while we do one. I'm like, fuck. So I hope I don't sound retarded on this one because
nah,
whenever we
dude.
do poetry, that's when it hurts the most,
Nah, dude, and I've seen this trend, and this really kind of irritates me, and I see it around big podcasts like Joe Rogan and things like that. People that have, hundreds of millions of downloads a month type thing.
God damn, I'm already sweaty. I gotta turn this fucking...
But like, just this obsession with kind of fact checking, this obsession with pretending everything is journalism. So like, if people want to get mad at us for saying something that like dude, this is a podcast, like this is a throwaway medium, like this is not like some informative fucking medium, like this is, you want to hang out and have and like about cool niche things and like hang out and talk about it, like that's what podcasts are. So like when people are like, oh, you should be fact checking somebody like Rogan or whatever in real time, it's like, dude, what the fuck do you think this is? Like, this is not a New York Times column. Like, this is just people talking. Like, they're gonna say some dumb shit, they're gonna say some wrong shit, they're gonna say
but that's
some
because
things.
like idiots listen to Rogan and then like take that as
sure, but like
because he's like talking to like whatever figure about their
Right.
book or like their particular research without
But I just mean like he's not pretending to be a journalist. Like he's not pretending to be like, oh, this is, you come to me for accurate. No, like he literally says all the time, I'm an idiot. Like, don't take advice from me. Like it's kind of, and it's this obsession with like, yeah, we have to be factual about it. It's like, no, we don't, dude. Like we're just talking. This is a fucking podcast. Like you all can act like this is some fucking, editorial that we went through like a series of fact checks. No, we didn't. We're just chatting. Our general knowledge, shit we don't know is going to sound dumb. I think we've mispronounced names that are like classic names. Like, who gives a fuck, dude? Nah, fuck these people that want everything like, nah, dude. Everybody wants to pretend that there isn't like this window for mistakes or shit, that everything is journalism. It's not, dude. No, like that's a fake. It's false. False framing. But yeah, that's my rant on that. You see that raw Dahl shit?
no.
Well, don't look at it, dude. It's just gonna piss you off. But
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
I may say the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
Oh, I mean, I feel like maybe. Oh, you know what? Maybe that's what my friend was talking about. But we were also. It's funny. The other day, I was taking a walk with my sister and her friend. We were talking about, that really egregious one that happened at Hamline.
oh, the adjunct professor.
Yeah,
Yeah, we talked about
and-
this on episode. Was
Yeah,
it
I'm
our
sure we did.
episode 31? I think listeners can go back. The Faulkner episode when that was hot. I know we're on a little bit of delay, listeners, but usually within the same month we talk about things. We'll put the episode out there. If you want us to do it more regularly, fucking sign up. All right. We don't have the time or money to be doing this more regularly or more frequently. All right. But we could if you all subscribed. But yeah, what were you saying? The Hamline.
Yeah, I was talking to someone about it, but I mean, it's the same thing that just happened. So if we do want a little update on the Hamline situation, obviously we know that there has been some movement toward a lawsuit, but also there was just an incident with McAllister, and there was, I believe, a Muslim artist
Whose art was curtained off, right?
Yeah, well, I think they just straight up took it down.
Right. Yeah.
Out of fear of,
Offense. Yeah.
being
Imagined offense, because it's not anybody saying anything.
Yeah,
It's
and
imagined
I was just like,
offense.
that's so sad. Like, you're just,
It's a
aren't you just
hypothetical.
like hurting the community that like you're trying to protect? But I don't know.
It's a hypothetical,
I
could be,
just-
possibly, maybe, and therefore we have
Yeah.
to take action. Like, it's a ridiculous conspiracy theorizing, and we're treating it like it's
I
sound.
mean, I think it's sad. I
rational
think
thinking.
especially the Hamline one is sad when you're talking about like an art history class and a 14th century piece of art that is like discussed as being specific, and also then having all the pressure on you to, expand the canon, right? Like, and be
Right.
and be as diverse as possible, which I think is what this teacher was doing.
Would you see the letter that the faculty signed?
When
I think it was couple after we released that episode, like a couple weeks.
Was it in defense of the teacher?
Yes.
Or-
Yeah, there was like 120 some faculty.
There's always one of those. Every time one of these happens, there's always one of those. This happened
Yeah.
to.
It
I
looks.
don't remember where it was. It was a New York school, maybe.
It looks like
Where that happened to a chem
yeah.
professor.
It looks like.
But this case was especially egregious.
Well, yeah, and I mean that one at NYU who got fired for being too difficult teaching organic chem. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
But-
as much about him and like what his deal is. Maybe he's just like some old fucking crank.
No.
Like, I don't know.
No, dude,
But,
it was
yeah.
it was literally kids mad that they couldn't pass the class. Like that's what it
Because they
always.
couldn't get into medical school.
Yeah, that's what it always is. That's what it always is. It is angry students that will have a vendetta and they want to get vengeance. It's not justice. This is not correcting the record. It is social vengeance. That's what it is. They're taking out their anger on somebody and we're letting it happen. Like, well, that's the thing with the Hamline thing. It looks like fire is putting enough pressure on that school. Looks like that president's going to get ousted. Now she's still hanging on and she's still fighting.
I mean, that was really bad.
Yes.
Like, you do not the day of, because somebody complained, come out and just say this is Islamophobic, and
Right. That's what I mean, because there are
and
no
this is,
adults.
like, I don't remember the language that they used, but it was language that I think does like.
It was the therapeutic language of social media. That's what it was.
No,
It was this
but it
causes
was
me
like-
harm. This is traumatic
This was
for
like
me.
one
This
of
is
those cases of
yeah.
this could like, be really damaging to this person's career, and like how.
I mean, damaging.
How
It
is,
destroys
like-
it. Like it
Yeah, I
destroys
mean,
it.
like,
There's
how
not
is
just damage.
this-
It is over.
Yeah.
Like this is
But
the
also,
problem.
like, how
we keep pretending.
how does the person who sent out that campus-wide email still like have a job even after walking back his statement? It's just like, dude, that's so not okay.
well, no, that's the
Who
thing.
signed off on that? Like, I mean,
Well, we
yeah,
keep pretending that this one side that keeps insisting we need to censor, that we need to fire people, that we need to limit people, that we need to take away rights. That's what we need to do to make things fair, right? That's the logic behind it. Like, we keep pretending that they have some type of rationale behind it. We keep pretending that like they have something to offer. Like, they don't. Like, they just want to censor art. They just want to get back at a teacher they don't like. Like, these people are
yeah,
not
I mean,
supporting
to me,
something.
This
They
was
are
just
lying.
an instance of
It is a lie.
someone who made the decision before they saw the image that they were going to complain about it.
But
Like,
yeah, exactly.
because they
exactly.
decided to sit there and see it. They had all the trigger warnings.
Exactly.
This teacher did seemingly everything right.
Exactly, dude. Exactly. But like this is it's going to keep
So I don't
happening.
even-
It's going to keep happening
yeah.
until an
It
adult
doesn't even
stands
sound
up
to me like
and
an
says
issue
no.
of like. Yeah, I don't know. This just sounds like
Where are
sort
the
of
leaders? Where are the people in
everyone
charge?
in this situation was very immature in how they handled it.
Well, and not just that. You're at a university. Like, again, where are the leaders? Who are the people that are going to stand up and say no to this? Because that's what we need. These people are just complaining. They're using these therapeutic language that they're repeating from social media, right? Oh, my trauma. Oh, this could possibly, maybe, might motivate some weirdos to do something. It's like, this is incredible, irrational bullshit
Yeah,
that they're
I mean,
feeding
this was
people.
also, like,
it is not. They don't have a leg to
again-
stand on. It's fake. They're lying. They're making it up. They're dressing it up in this therapeutic language to make it seem like it's harmful to look at a picture or have a book published sitting on a shelf in a bookstore. Like, this is what it is such an exaggeration. It is hyperbolic. It is unhinged exaggeration. And the same thing with this Roald Dahl stuff. I guess you didn't see it. It just came out these
No, I
last 2 days here. We're recording this on February 18th, listeners. So when you hear this, it'll be a couple weeks and it'll feel stale, but it's still like, again, who's standing up for this? People are like the Roald Dahl stuff. Well, okay, the estate was sold to some fucking publisher, right? They are literally rewriting the books. They're rewriting the books to take out what they call, quote unquote, offensive language, right? And this is the same case. These are the same people that are saying they're harmed by looking at a picture. These are the same people that say they're harmed by a book sitting on the shelf, published, that they're harmed by it, right? It's not just that they don't like it. It's that they're harmed by it, and we need to remove it and censor it. No,
it can be offensive language that we still look back at and say, like, this was offensive, and maybe, like, you know, here's how we've evolved as society.
Well,
I think
that's
what
pretending.
we continue to do with, like, people like Flannery O'Connor, for instance. Like, well, I mean, you know, what do you really expect? She was, I mean, yeah, but of course she was racist. Like, yeah. She was a white woman in the South.
During segregation, like during legal segregation.
You know, and I think while we can be troubled by that, we can also...
Well, it's troubled.
Like, yeah. I mean,
troubled.
Like,
they're not troubled. No one is troubled by knowing this fact that America was very like, nobody's troubled. Like, that's what I mean. It's a lie. Like, they're lying about this. They're lying that reading a Flannery O'Connor book hurts them and stuff. Like, it doesn't. It doesn't. It's an exaggeration. Okay. It's incredibly hyperbolic, and everybody needs to just stop playing along with these people. And this Roald Dahl stuff, dude, they're taking out words like fat. They're rewriting this stuff because, of course, that's offensive. It's so Augustus Gloop is no longer fat, right? They can't call him fat in Willy Wonka, you know, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. This is what it is, dude. Like, and we keep making excuses for it. We keep pretending that the people trying to censor art have some rational ground to stand on. They don't. They are lying. They are exaggerating. They're being incredibly unhinged and hyperbolic. They're exaggerating the harms, again, quote unquote, scare quotes, harms that a published book does to people. Like, it's absurd. We're living in a circus, and where are the adults? Like, that's what I mean. Where are these people that know that these people, like, this is not a rational ground to stand on. This is not a way forward. This is not healing. Again, the therapeutic language that they use there. This is not healing or dealing with trauma. This is censorship of art. And I'm so tired of excuses for censorship, for removing things from publication. Like, I am so sick of this. Like, it's reached absurd levels. And rightfully, a lot of writers are going after it right now. And again, not all of them. A lot of them are saying, oh, actually, they have a point to change all these words in Roald Dahl's masterpieces. It's like, oh, okay.
Well, it just feels like very whitewashy.
That's what it is.
Okay.
It is.
Let's just also, like, if he did say something that's really offensive, let's not write over it and just accept that it's there. And again,
it's a hyper, to say that he wrote anything offensive is a hyper exaggeration.
But, like, just to play devil's advocate here, even if he did, right? But, you know, the same thing.
The logic is sound. I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you don't want to, I don't know. Like, you don't just cover up what, like.
Right. Exactly.
What bad occurred, you know? I think
that's what I mean. They want to teach.
Crazy to do that. But I guess I shouldn't say crazy either.
No, it is. But, I think it's crazy. It's crazy. And I think more people should say it. Like, it's crazy to start trying to censor this in order to save the world from racism. Like, that's literally what they're doing. They're trying to save the world through censoring art. Like, it is absurd. It's illogical. There is no rational ground. These people are unhinged, exaggerating liars. And we should just start calling them that.
Honestly,
like, that's what it is.
If you want
they don't care about
more
books.
Supportive of,
they don't care about literature.
The Black art community. Like, the
that's
best
the
thing
excuse.
to probably do is actually just to consume more literature and art by Black people instead of just pointing out who did bad.
Well, that's the excuse,
that's
right?
My feeling about it. Like,
the excuse is we're trying to save Black people from racism. That's the excuse that's being used. Yeah. And that it's just so. And again, if you challenge that,
well, I mean, not with fat.
Well, that's the logic. If you break it down, that's the logic behind it. We're trying to, well, again, with fat people, they're trying to save fat people from offense or fat people from shame. It's the same logic applied, right? So if we're trying to be heroes through literature by censoring art, by rewriting things, by trying to pretend that, yes, that like, it's contradictory in terms of acknowledging the history, right? Like, that's a line everybody uses where it's like almost everybody agrees, acknowledge the history. Like, nobody's denying this fucking ugly history, right? but we are denying it if we're censoring works from that time.
Oh, yeah.
Like it's just it's unbelievable. It's illogical, and these people are liars. They are their entire job is to find moral emergencies that don't exist. They will manufacture them, and they will say that a book being published is so harmful. A book sitting on a shelf for sale is so harmful. Like, again, like that, when you put it that way, if it doesn't seem ridiculous to you, then like you need to like reevaluate your situation in some way. It's so ridiculous. Like, this book is not harming anybody. It's a fucking book. And we don't need to censor these pictures. We don't need to go to the lowest common denominator. And we just keep making excuses like we're trying to save black people from racism, like we're trying to save fat people from being shamed or something, as if fat people don't exist, right? As if you can't look around in the world and see fat adults, fat little kids, right? We have to pretend they don't exist because otherwise it would be shame. They would feel bad about it. Like, again, it's and that people keep trying to rationalize this away with arguments, but the problem is that the argument for censorship is not rational. It is an irrational, exaggerated, hyperbolic claim, and everyone thinks that we can just rationalize it away. We can't rationalize it away. These people are going to keep trying to censor things as long as we let them. And why I keep asking, where are the adults? Where are the leaders? Where are the publishing houses that care about books, that care about art, that care about literature? Where are they? Because they're literally bending over backwards to do this fake, illogical bullshit. And I'm just so sick of seeing it, dude. Like, I'm so sick of it. It's ruining the art. Like, it's ruining art. It's ruining books. It's ruining so much. And everybody's just like, oh, well, it's a tough one. Like, no, it's just like the Hamline thing. It's not tough. It's pretty clear cut if we're doing it rationally, but we're not. Like, we keep pretending that these fucking idiots that are making things up, repeating things they heard on social media have a point. Like, they don't. They just want to censor art. They just want to be in charge. They want to control how you can express yourself, how you can do it. They want to control everything. Like,
I mean, I think there are some who are probably well-intentioned, right? Like, I think
they tell themselves that, but I don't think they are.
With the case of the word fat, I don't think it's that they like want to pretend that they don't exist so much as they want to change the language around it, right? But either way,
which is still censorship.
It doesn't typically feel very helpful.
Because it's not. It's just censoring art and then saying we solved the problem.
Like, I mean, Emily Dickinson was probably an uptight bitch.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
But yeah, I mean, this will be talked about. We really
don't know a lot. I mean, I guess we could know more. We could read her letters, which I have not. Still really have not read most of her at this point.
Yeah. Again, they're going to come for Dickinson soon, too. This is what I mean. Like, it's starting with the kids' literature. It starts with the kids' literature, right? This is what people, it's children's books. It doesn't matter. And then it comes Mark Twain, right? We have to censor the N-word out of Mark Twain. We have to censor all this stuff because
I fucking hate Mark Twain. Censor the shit out of him, see if I care.
But, I mean, I just, like, that's the thing, right? Like, and then that's the thing. And then apathy is an excuse, right? Like, all of this stuff is just like, we don't have to preserve our history at all. We don't have to preserve these artifacts.
No, I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it's helpful. I think if you're going to show
and then
Mark
we have to
Twain,
censor
you should
Emily
show
Dickinson.
him in all of his awfulness.
I was as we were preparing for this, listeners, I was sending Sophie like pictures. There's like a few like mentions of Jews and stuff, and like some of the, the lesser known Dickinson poems that we're not. But we don't canonize, but like, they're in her collected complete works that we're reading here this week. And dude, you think that's not coming soon? Like, you think that's not coming? Like, that's coming. Like, if nobody stops, if nobody is saying, hold on, that's irrational, this is ridiculous, what are you talking about? It's a book. Like, no, like as long as nobody's saying that, like, they're coming for everybody. There was one edit to Dahl and Matilda. They took out the reference to Kipling. Rudyard Kipling, the British poet, right? Mm-hmm. They took out a reference to him and they inserted like Jane Austen or something garbage. Like I mean, whatever. Jane Austen, people like Austen. She's an important writer in the canon. I'm not a fan, but I know a lot of people like her. Whatever. You don't have to like everything in the canon, like it's just there as a record. Like, it's just there. I don't,
but I've really only read that one book, which is not known to be her strongest. In fact, might be her worst.
Well, they're coming for it, dude. We saw this with poetry. We saw this with Berryman, dude. Like Berryman, it was 5, 6, 7 years ago. Everybody is saying, "Oh, you're not supposed to read. Oh, we should censor it. Oh, we should take it out." Like all of this stuff, dude. Like it's not going to stop, and that's what really irritates me about it. And listeners can bitch. Listeners can say they agree with us. I mean, we're right, so they should agree with us. But like, it's gonna come. Like as long as people keep saying, making excuses for it, keep pretending that people are harmed by an image, harmed by a metaphor in a book, harmed by written words on a page, as long as we pretend that that has credence, it's going to get worse. And this is what leads to all of it. Like it's absurd. And part of the reason that we started this podcast, I couldn't stand what I was seeing. I was looking around feeling like I was fucking suffocated because everyone's saying, "Oh, this is bad. You can't read that. We have to censor this. We have to change these." Like, and I'm just looking around going like, is anybody going to say how crazy this is? Like, this is literally 1984 shit. And of course, everybody gets mad when you make that reference because it's not 1984. We're definitely not changing and rewriting books. And again, it's this excuse that we're trying to, save people through censoring art. Like it is so Puritan. This is what the Christians did. This is what the Spanish Inquisition did. This is what the Puritans did. This is during the witch trials. Like they are trying to censor people for their own good. And it is so absurd. Where are all the writers? Where are all the writers standing up to this? Like I saw Joyce Carol Oates doing her usual kind of like, this is insane, but nobody else with any prominence is standing up and saying, this is insane. Stop listening to these children. It's just, I mean, I'm furious about it. Obviously you can tell, but like I said, they're coming for all of it. So I'm glad I have a copy of Dickinson before they fucking censor that shit and you can't get it anymore. Like what they're doing with the Dahl shit.
I think I just got rid of a copy of Going Solo.
Really?
Or whatever.
Yeah. Really
I think
pisses
that's
me
the
off,
only
man.
Roald Dahl book I still owned. I think I got rid of it last summer.
Really irritates the shit out of me. And because it's
And
so
I just
fake.
I just gave my copy of the collected Flannery to a friend.
I was going to say, dude, you better be careful. That's the next one, dude. They're going to start censoring that.
I mean, that one's already sort of come under fire, and I think that's pretty quieted down, at least in, I don't know. I haven't been looking at, like, the social media literature world lately.
Yeah. It's incredible to me that anybody's taking it seriously, but of course we have PhDs taking it seriously, writing defenses of it. So it's going to get worse until somebody stops it, and it looks like nobody is. So listen to this podcast, subscribe to this podcast if you are concerned about this bullshit, because we don't stand for it. Fuck that. Fuck that. Fuck these goddamn Puritans, dude. I'm so sick of this Puritan bullshit described as being nice. Like, it's so...
Being nice, well...
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. It's because, we're just trying to make it better. We're just trying to be nice to one another. That's all it is. We're just asking you to, censor everything to be nice. Like, fuck off, dude. It is Puritan bullshit. It is witch hunting. It is persecution. It's the same thing throughout history. If you're the ones trying to censor art, you are not the good guys, all right? Like, that's just what it is. It's crazy. But all right, I'll stop ranting about this. I just saw it today, and I'm like, holy fucking shit. These people, dude. Editors, publishers, stop hiring 20-somethings to censor books. Like, please, stop. You don't have to do it. You do not have to hire 20-somethings to censor Roald Dahl. Like, it doesn't have to be done. But we're pretending it does, again, to save the world from what, I don't know. I don't know what they can't say it either. They don't know what they're trying to save the world from. I've had a lot of fucking coffee and I'm roaring to go now, so. Emily Dick.
I'm Dick.
Pulling out the dick.
Get your dicks out.
Pull out your dicks and listen
That's
up.
really like the least Emily Dickinson thing we could say, probably. But
Emily Dick. All right, so yeah. What the fuck podcast is this, Soph?
this is Heavy Board.
Not Andrew Wittstadt.
And I'm admittedly a little bit bored.
And today we're doing the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. And this one's going to be, as we said earlier, listeners, we're cutting this into several parts because we both love Dickinson and we want to do it right. We don't want to squeeze this like 800-page volume of her poetry into one, 2-hour episode. So we're going to break this up into a couple parts. We're aiming for like 3 or 4, but we'll see how it goes, depending on how in-depth we get here.
Yeah, I also don't want to make myself hate Dickinson by like sitting down and reading, thousands of poems straight.
Do you think that's...
You won't.
Yeah.
You won't. I will. Because I read everything 8 million times, and
I just mean, like, is that even... I don't think it would be possible for me to hate Dickinson at the end of this.
No, not to hate her, but, like,
not
to
have
get
the
burnt
reverence.
out on it.
Yeah. You can get... I was getting a little burnt out. So what we did, listeners, we have the same version of this, the Thomas H. Johnson version. The title page here, sorry. So this is
Back
by...
Bay Books.
Yeah, Back Bay Books, Little Brown and Company imprint. And originally, I think this version came out... let's see here. 1960 was the first version of this version of her work. So this is the one put together by Johnson here.
Yeah, the first in 1960, copyright. Yeah, the copyright's all over the place. Starting with 1890, because obviously there were a lot of different publications of her work, but we can go into that in a minute when we, I have some notes from the intro that we can maybe...
Yeah, and the 50s, we can get into
discuss.
that and how they did this. But yeah, the 50s were really where a lot of the kind of refinement to these kind of, complete works of Dickinson's were happening at Harvard and other big schools. So 51 and 55 are the big ones. And then there were some that came out in the late 1800s after her death by a few editors. And there is, they changed some of the poems in this. And we have a few questions about this as we get through her work here. And we talk about, how her poems were discovered, because that gets into it, all that good stuff. But yeah, so we have the same version of this. Pick up a copy, again, before... the censors come for it. I got mine at Barnes & Noble's like over a decade ago. I'm sure they still sell it. I don't know if...
I got mine for like $3 or $4 used from a bookseller through a library that was selling used copies. So
Yeah. And you can find that, listeners. So as always, we'll link it in the description. We may also reference this Helen Vendler book that Sophie and I were referencing throughout, just called Dickinson. Helen Vendler, if you don't know, is one of the lead. I guess she's still alive, but she's very old now. Towards the end of her life, she's not putting out a lot of work. But she was one of the premier poetry critics of the 20th century. She was kind of Harvard's big poetry critic for the last half of the 20th century there, and still today. I think she's mostly retired. I think she's very old now, like in her 90s, and is...
She's gotten some heat similar to Bloom, too.
Yes, because she defends the canon from this kind of rewriting of it and all of that. And if you do that, you're considered against the noble cause of censorship and rewriting history.
Yeah, she definitely also, I really like Vendler. I also think she, whatever statements... she's made on that. She made some statement that
talking about the
made
2011
crazy. Probably, yeah.
Rita Dove edited book.
I don't know.
She wrote it. That was a controversial thing in 2011. She wrote this article about how she disagreed with a lot of this kind of same thing as Bloom, this kind of ever expanding canon where everything is good, therefore nothing is good, right? And
I think she probably got some right, some
that.
wrong there, and I think she also used maybe the most angry, crotchety kind of old lady language that she could have, but what you gonna do?
Well,
we don't
you
have
could talk
a
about
lot
semantics,
of big
but her
critics.
arguments sound. Yeah,
We don't have a lot of major ones.
I mean, dude, we've seen this all the
increasingly
time.
we see, the thing of the poet as the critic, so that's why you'll see collections of Coin of the Realm. We see Carl Phillips. We see a lot of poets sort of taking that on, and it's definitely I would say not entirely the same in terms of the kind of criticism we see, but similar. It's sometimes a little less in the way of classicist work there that you would see from someone like Vendler, or you would see from someone even like Marjorie Perloff, who's somebody who I would say is maybe more of like an avant-garde focused critic. Still have David Lehman, I guess. Is he still around? Like, I don't know. He edits like every big fucking collection. And there are several others. I have quite a few good ones, I think, on my shelf.
And we do try to do that on this podcast. So a lot of the nonfiction we do on this podcast is mostly poetic kind of theory and craft. Why do we do that? Not just because Sophie and I are specialized in poetry here, but because, and we're trained, formally in poetry, but like, because I always say, dude, like, not enough fiction writers are reading poetry, and like, not enough fiction writers understand poetry, and it's really hurting literature. Like, this is a huge part of literature, and people just pretend that poetry can be ignored, that it isn't the most sacred of
and
crafts.
We both complained about this, how, I've said it before that I had teachers in my MFA program who were specialized in fiction and did not feel comfortable discussing or judging poetry, and would go to the poetry students to ask for help if they were supposed to be judging something. And I was like, oh, that's a bad look. Don't admit that to me.
This is anecdotal, but I was going down a rabbit hole on YouTube the other day. I was going down a Jonathan Franzen interview rabbit hole on YouTube, and I was watching a lot of the clips and videos of various interviews he's given over the last 20 years. And there was one he gave maybe 7 years ago, like 2015-ish, where he talked a little shit about Emily Dickinson. And I was just like, oh my God, dude, like, I respect Jonathan Franzen, but like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And just because like you think you can say this because you don't understand what you're saying. Like, he was saying that Dickinson was a bad writer. Those were his exact words. And I don't want to take him out of context with this, because he was trying to make a point about how when you're forced to read a lot of her work, you notice that the rhymes are more slant rhymes and not perfect rhymes. And I was just like, dude,
that's what I mean. Slant rhymes.
Right.
Like,
That's what I mean. That's what I mean. And I'm just like, dude,
slant
I get
rhymes
it.
Rhymes are often better than
he's
hard
a great
rhymes, but yeah, okay.
Dude, he's a great fiction writer, one of the best Gen X novelists. Okay. Like, he wrote the corrections. If listeners haven't read that, go read that book, go buy it and read it. It is an incredible book. I sobbed for like 20 minutes after I read it. But like, dude, I'm just like, no, Franz, like, you don't understand what you're talking about. Just stop opining about Emily Dickinson here. Like, and I get he didn't mean anything by it. He was just talking about writing craft, and it was just something he said.
Like, I think we also give way too much weight to writers just sort of talking shit. I mean, here we are. Like, we say, yes, we are formally trained, but, maybe more trained in poetry than most. But very often myself, as you probably know, question my own judgments, feelings about things. And, there are a lot of times too, and we'll probably talk about this, but even with someone like Emily Dickinson, sometimes it's hard to know how much of your appreciation comes from a place of familiarity versus whether something is good. So like, when I find myself reading it and like judging other poems as being lesser, is it because I'm not as familiar with them, or is it because they're actually not as strong?
I think
and so
it's
you can find yourself in that, and you can find yourself in that place even with contemporary poets. I have this issue a lot where I'm just like sort of in the middle. I'm not sure yet. Or if I maybe don't like something, but you're still sort of searching for the technical reason why in the poem, or whatever the moment of the poem is that makes you respond that way to it. So I think maybe sometimes we just give too much weight to someone saying like, this is my preference, this is what I think, when really that is mostly what they're saying. Is if someone's saying like, I don't think Emily Dickinson's a good writer, or they're just saying Emily Dickinson was a bad writer, you just have to remember to put the words I think in front of it, right? Because we all cut that out. We all try to be more of an authority on it when we speak. It's one of the first things that you try to teach students in like a college English class is like, drop that out of every thesis statement, drop that out of every claim you make. Just stop putting I feel like, I think that. And it's something that I say a lot when we're just talking, but I think we do tend to see that and put too much, take it too much as like, this is, what they believe and are immovable on it. And I think that's very rarely true.
Well, even so, like, this is what Bloom talks about, and when he talks about living with the poem or living with the literature, so reading and rereading and memorizing and living inside of it, kind of thing. I think that's what he means by it, where he's like, you know it so well that it like that you start to understand deeper. Like, you can't help but start to understand like the deeper meanings and things like that.
And
if
that's
you
what
take the time to really live with it, know it, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, and that's what really, builds the love of a poem, right? Like, and that's what I'm talking about really when I'm talking about that sort of level of familiarity. I mean, we do the same thing with music, right? You might initially kind of hate a song, and the more you hear it, the more it gets stuck in your head. You begin to like it. And so I just want to point out, we just read 200 pages of Dickinson, which, if like, her poems are pretty short. So, you'll see at least like 4 poems per, each 2 pages, right? So at least 2 poems a page. Many of these poems we have not lived with yet. Right. Many of these poems we're
the
just
more
reading,
famous
and
ones,
we're not. Yeah, sure. But like many, that's not most of them. And many of them we just read and said yes or no, or sort of thought about what we thought maybe the main themes were, or looked up some of the words to make sure that we had something of a central understanding. Right. But we haven't lived with most of these poems yet. So as we're discussing it, I just want to point that out.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
What we say is not necessarily the end of the conversation,
Well,
or like the most,
that's what I mean,
or at least in my world, right? I can only really speak for me. I mean, some of my notes are just like, this one just says funeral shit next to it. Like,
well, that's,
I think I have that on poem 53, but it's like, and that was just a note to me to make sure I sort of had that context as I was talking about it. But I'm far off from having lived with poem 53.
Well, still, but like that gets back to what we were talking about at the very beginning when we started recording this, like this obsession with everything is journalism now, right? Like as if we're doing some like tell-all end-all thing on Emily Dickinson. It's like, no, we're doing a deep dive for ourselves, like that, like, and then and listeners that want to
just doing some
join
personal
in.
Enrichment,
right? And then this is not some type of like research thing. This is, I mean, we do it when we're curious, but like we're not, well, let's find the answer. Like, like it's not like that. That's what I mean. Like, get back to this. Well, the whole thing, every side, everything must be. Nah, dude, no. Like, this is just our opinions on what we read.
Yeah, I think if we were reading like the Selected or the Helen Vendler, we would probably do deeper dives. And of course Helen Vendler's comes with her essays and breakdowns, and you may or may not agree. I think when you're reading someone like Vendler, it's always fun to try to find if there's any place where you might disagree. So really try to give it your best before you read her essay about the poem, see if your interpretation is different. And obviously she is more like educated in Dickinson and has read more of Dickinson, so I do tend to defer, but
yeah, those that aren't familiar with Vendler's work, she has every scholar has a few poets they're obsessed with. She's obsessed with a few, just like all the rest. Dickinson is one, Stevens, I think she's really obsessed with Keats. Yeah, she's really obsessed with
Hopkins.
Keats. There's a few. Everybody has their favorites.
I'm just taking those from one of her books about style and how it changes over time. Maybe it's the breaking of style or something like that. I can't remember.
She's written some interesting ones. I have her one about poets thinking, where it's about the diaries and kind of paired with their work at the time.
That's really cool. I'd like to read that.
And you get speculative when it comes to that. But
and she's very readable. She's very readable, I think.
And she's open to saying that this is a speculative assessment, but this is what the evidence, I think, says. You know what I mean? Like a good scholar would say, is like, we're speculating now, but just follow with me on the evidence here and see what you think. You know what I mean? Because of course she's a Harvard trained, scholar. All right, let me do fucking housekeeping before I forgot last time. And then we'll get into this book Okay, so those that don't know, we have a subscription plan. You can subscribe to full access to this podcast to receive uncensored episodes only for subscribers, bonus episodes, etc. Go to patreon.com/heavyboard to get full access to this podcast. If you don't want to do that, can't afford that, there are other ways to support us. You can go to our YouTube channels, give us a subscribe, a like, a share on those. Either our Clips channel at Heavyboard Clips or our main channel at Heavyboard. That helps us out. You can also give us a 5-star review. That's another free way to support us. You can go to Apple, Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. That helps us out, helps us grow. Free way to support us. And as always, we're still looking for these kind of workshop horror stories. If you've had a terrible experience in a workshop and you want to share it with us, we'd love to hear from you. Send that to heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com in excruciating detail. And we'd like to have a good time with it on the podcast. Yeah, that's it. And all right, so Dickinson. That was good housekeeping, nice and quick. All right, so where do you want to start with this, Soph? We did...
I mean, there isn't a whole lot I think we need to go over in terms of her background before we jump into the poems. I would just say, you know, she is the Amherst mystery. You know, if you know anything about Dickinson, you probably know that she was holed up in her big house referred to as the homestead in Amherst, Massachusetts. She spent a little bit of time, I think, at Mount Holyoke. It's an all-women's college up there. Really small. She writes a little bit about it. We see some of that in the intro here. But either way,
that's one thing I learned from this introduction is, you know, I've always loved Dickinson, but I've never been like a huge know everything about her type scholar or just, you know, hobbyist, whatever. But
or maybe I've watched a few documentaries, so I might be conflating information from documentaries with this intro. So forgive.
Well, that and her, like, you know, I just, when we're taught about her in school, I think there's kind of this overemphasis on the later years of her life, like after her parents died and stuff. And she was kind of this hermit that locked herself in her bedroom and wouldn't leave. Like, we're kind of, they portray
which
that.
Which is true.
Yeah, which is true.
You know, from what
but that's
we know,
portrayed as like,
from what I understand.
But I understood that, again, this is due to my ignorance because I didn't know enough, but it was like, I understood that to be, oh, she did that her whole life. No, that was like the last 10, 20 years of her life. And like, she was a normal, or, you know, somewhat normal, kind of going about town, normal person.
From a wealthy family.
Yeah,
right?
from an
like,
upper class family. And
had the wealth to, you know, go
not
to
work
school
and have house servants and things like that.
Yeah. So
that was something I always forget
sort of
about.
Being something of a hermit in her later years. So
there's that.
Do you know, let's see, I don't know if I made note of her death here.
1886, 1896.
Yeah, but like it's speculated like Bright's disease or some shit. I don't remember.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, everybody was dying of, you know, what we consider now easily
I don't
preventable
remember how
diseases,
old she was, is what I'm saying, but probably not that old, you know.
Yeah. And the other thing that I learned,
not that young though. She was fairly old, right? Like she was very old for someone at that time.
The other thing I learned about this was that, you know, everyone, when you go to the overview in school and stuff like that, they're like, oh, she didn't publish during her lifetime or whatever, but like that's not true either. Yeah, like she didn't do much publishing, but there were like 6, 7 poems published by that guy.
And some anonymously.
Higginson is the guy that she wrote to.
I think there were a couple poems that maybe were published anonymously, and that was maybe something of a trend at the time. I think that wasn't unusual to publish poems without the name.
Yeah,
and that might have been. I think that might have been in like a school journal, maybe at Amherst or something.
Yeah, in April 15th, 1862 was when Thomas Wentworth Higginson received a letter from Emily Dickinson enclosing 4 of her poems. And in this next paragraph on page 4, or page 6 of the introduction, sorry, these fucking Roman numerals, The editor, the main author, Johnson, writes, the importance of the correspondence with Higginson thus initiated and continuing throughout Emily Dickinson's life cannot be exaggerated. In the first place, the 4 poems she initially selected reveal that in 1862, the poet was no longer a novice, but an artist whose strikingly original talent was fully developed. She enclosed Safe in Their Alabaster Chambers, that's number 216, I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose, number 318, The Nearest Dream Recedes, Unrealized, 319, and We Play at Paste, 320. What embarrassed Higginson about the poems was his inability to classify them. In 1891, he wrote an article describing this early correspondence. Quote, the impression of a wholly new and original poetic genius, he said, was as distinct on my mind at the first reading of these 4 poems as it is now, after 30 years of further knowledge, and with it came the problem never yet solved. What place ought to be assigned in literature to what is so remarkable, yet so elusive of criticism? Higginson's problem was compounded by the fact that during Emily Dickinson's lifetime, he was never convinced that she wrote poetry. As he phrased his opinion to a friend, her verses were, quote, remarkable, though odd. Too delicate, not strong enough to be published.
Yeah, so that's straight from this introduction of this book.
Yeah.
But yeah, as you know, if you know probably at least maybe Safe in Alabaster Chambers, depending on how familiar with the poet you are, you might not know the others. You might know I'll Tell You How the Sun Rose.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think we're going to get to this as we get towards the end of this episode, but the fact that it was after she had already written these 200 and some,
over
I mean, that's 300,
wild,
400 poems,
right?
and then picked what she thought were the 4 best. And as reading through, you can
and none
kind
of them
tell.
before the
tell.
200 mark.
Yeah,
right.
you
So
can
she had
tell.
already written 216 poems before selecting these.
And as we're going to get to this, listeners, but as you go through this, like reading the first 200 pages of this huge 800-page book,
As far as we can
her
tell,
poems, you can tell, like there is a point in that, 1859, 1860, 1861, and then 1862, as these poems you go through in order, like that's where the magic started to happen. Like right
the
around
first
there
one,
is when
it's like
she
around
became
page 100.
Yeah,
like you said, we see Safe in Alabaster Chambers, and then and from there, that's around where the poems do start to really feel
what you know of as Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, more
like
like
her
her
style, her unique song style, her unique rhythm.
We really begin to see a more, I would say, I'm hesitant to say uniform use, but more expanded use maybe of the M dash as
and you see that.
punctuation.
We always say this. This is why you need to read a complete works of, especially older writers, where you can get all their works. They're not putting out anymore, right? And you can see it. If you're interested, you can see this growth. You can see what's happening here.
Yeah, in places it feels a little tighter, but there are earlier ones that stand out too. There are poems before this point that are big ones, and we'll talk about some of those too. We probably won't get to all of them. But one of the cool things is also just seeing the progression of her obsessions over time, how they sort of play on one another, how, for the first, I don't know how many, you see her starting to sort of play with all of the themes that I think become more realized in the later poems. Everything from, obviously she was someone who was obsessed with the idea of what poetry is, what it does, and, immortality, not just as something religious, but also something tied to being a writer, right? Maybe not the cleanest way I might have said that, but it's fine.
Yeah, but it's like something going back to, Shakespeare, even before that, right? Like the immortality.
Yeah, I mean, really,
type.
really early on, my wheel is in the dark. I cannot see a spoke, yet know its dripping feet go round and round.
The last couple things, the last two, before we get to poems and the introduction, what do we think of the grouping that is used in this? Because Johnson does take time to give us in a little footnote on the bottom of page 8 in the introduction here. on like the packets. Her poems were discovered after her death, sewn into these little packets, but not just sewn. There were scattered ones, but there were organized ones as well. And people have taken some liberties with that. So Johnson is trying to be completely transparent in how he's doing this and how he grouped them. I was saying, what do you think of these groupings? Whereas you can see the years, she kind of grouped them by year. And in the Vendler book, there was some more scholarship on this after this book came out, where people started to use, like kind of forensic evidence, like watermarks, how they line up, what order were they originally in when she put them away in that drawer type thing, that they've tried to kind of, make more accurate, more what it was when how she intended it or something. But yeah, I don't know. Just what are your thoughts?
I don't know. I mean, I haven't revisited the Vendler intro, but I did find that I felt there was like a natural movement from one to the next. So I did appreciate that. I don't think between this copy and a Vendler, which again we're looking at with Vendler selected, a very limited collection where you wouldn't necessarily see the movement from one poem to the next poem, or start to see sort of how her formulas work, how her mind is working, like how she's sort of trying to flesh out the same idea across different poems. I liked that we could see a lot of that happening close to one another. But then I know like there are some poems that I kept thinking like this is the same sort of formula she's using for something that comes later, like the zeros taught us phosphorus.
Well,
or
yeah. But I just mean like you can see it here in the grouping. So in 1858 there were 51 poems sewn together in a packet. In 1859 there were 93. 1860, 63.
Right.
1861,
So
85.
those...
And then 1862, 366 poems were tied together from that year. And that's the year, as we already mentioned, where you can see Dickinson became Dickinson, like the one that we know today. And you can recognize her kind of style just from reading a few poems. And it's kind of like, yeah, that was a very productive year for her, it looks like, and the way she kind of grouped the poems, if we're to believe that's how they're put together. And, after that, it was like 140 in 1863, 64, 172. Like, this just kept being more and more, like these hundreds of poems a year. And you can see it grow. You can see it get there. But yeah, that. And then the last thing I had to ask is, what do we think of the edits put in after her death by Higginson in the one hand, but then her sisters, and then, the women that helped make sure she was a remembered canonized poet after her death, kind of in the late 19th century, early 20th century.
In this copy, I think the idea was it not to try to restore them as closely as possible to their original state, right?
Yeah,
or the state that she intended.
In this version. But I just mean like, that's something that we have to grapple with in terms of like, you have no control over this stuff once you're dead, but like she seems to have been, so many people were putting their fingers in there,
well, and
kind
she
of thing.
knew, well, and we know how she felt about it, right? Because we know that she saw some of her poems published or looked at by Higginson, right? And that he had changed a lot. Or that it was him, right?
Yeah. Him and then a few others where they edited out mostly punctuation
changed
stuff.
Her punctuation.
I think the most egregious ones, he changed words around to make a perfect rhyme instead of a slant rhyme and things like that. And, just inconsiderate things like that. But, that's something that I think when you're talking about Dickinson's complete works, we just have to mention, that it's there is some bastardizing that took place that we can never know.
As non-scholars, I think, at least for me, I just sort of accept it. It's something that I'd be happy to... If I could see different versions side by side, that would be cool. We do actually get that in at least one poem here. And I want to talk about that one because I think the change is interesting. And I think actually Vendler talks about it too. But and I think Dickinson, in one of the documentaries I watched, I don't remember which one, but that was one of the things that some of the scholars on there talked about, was you could see her really playing with poems a lot, never being quite done with any one version and sometimes keeping multiple versions, as though sort of leaving it to the reader, or maybe making available different interpretations. So it seems like that was something she was interested in and wasn't necessarily tied to having just one version of one poem, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, even I think, dates are going to be conjecture, right, for all the poems. So, they do their best.
A lot of it is estimated, yeah. But even that, so we start really with like the first records that she had, which was 1850 with that first poem.
And we know, some of the first big publications of her poems, like after she died, right, we know that Higginson published a really altered version of just a narrow selection of poems. And then that was received well. And I think it happened again. And then finally, it was reconstructed, right, by, I think, maybe her
It was her sister and her
is it her sister or sister-in-law? Like, I don't know. She
her
definitely had a
living-
brother.
The book said at the time her only living heir, which was a woman that was Dickinson was the maiden name, and she, I guess for whatever reason at that, had the rights or something, and she put out a few volumes. And this was in the 1900s, 20, 30 years after her death, after Dickinson's
other
death.
people, one of whom I think it was like thought that her brother was having an affair with this woman who I think like was maybe a singer or something, and she was brought in to help by maybe, I don't remember. I don't fucking remember. Y'all go watch that documentary. You can find like several documentaries about her on like Canopy. If you can get a library account, do it. Highly recommend it.
And the first one that I stuck out to me was number 2. Maybe because it was sandwiched between these kind of long poems that aren't really her style.
The first one seems so far off from her style, with like really long lines, a lot of sort of, we don't see any dashes here. Maybe one, maybe two
toward the end, yeah. But it's also like you can tell that she's kind of going over the great kind of epic tradition that poetry still was at the time. And again, this was 1850. We did our Walt Whitman episode where there were things that were starting to change in terms of like the styles and stuff of poetry. But number 2 is the one that stood out to me because it was just, this is the one that kind of right away shows her style already, what she was trying to go for, and not just copy, the kind of epic form that poetry was.
Yeah, and this is a case where I think mostly like Emily Dickinson is Emily Dickinson in her poems for the most part. Like, I mean,
right.
Maybe a step removed, but here we do see an address to her brother, Austin. Right. There is another sky ever serene and fair. There is another sky ever serene and fair, and there is another sunshine, though it be darkness there. Never mind faded forests, Austin. Never mind silent fields. So there we see a direct address to her brother at the very end. Prithee, my brother, into my garden come.
Yeah, and we just see her little kind of rhythmic use there where we see that. I just noticed it as the first development for that, for me.
Yeah, and we know that she uses the hymn, right? Maybe not until a little bit later, but that was sort of her. It seemed to be her big influence, right? Hymns.
Yeah. Vendler makes this point that the King James Bible, that version is the one that Dickinson would have known.
Yeah.
So she was no doubt well versed in that, as she was, upper class educated woman at the time, and I'm sure there was a lot of scripture reading and the hymnals, right? That's music. There's a lot of music in those old hymns. Like there's a lot. I mean, they're meant to be kind of sung. They're so old. That's what it still was, kind of. And I think Johnny Cash has said things like, he learned how to sing and dance by singing the hymns, like when he was a kid in like his poor little town with his mother and shit in church, like that was everybody singing the hymns together and things, and it gives you kind of a sense of rhythm, expectation, kind of. But that's neither here nor there. I marked number 11. What did you mark in this kind of first couple pages here?
I think I marked 12.
12. Okay.
The Mourns are meeker than they were.
Nice. And those are both 1858 poems?
Yeah.
And they're both they're more condensed than those first couple. We're starting to see, again, like this stuff take place. Which one did you want to talk about? 12?
Which one did you say you had marked?
11, the one right before it. So I imagine they were composed in sequence at some point. Although 12 is one that I guess was published right after her death there in 1890 for the first time.
Oh, I think I also marked 10, but that might have just been for rhythm.
Well, that's part of why I marked them.
Just in these early ones, yeah, you see, like, she's using that ABCB rhyme structure.
And this is important, like,
a
for
lot
listeners
of iambic
and stuff.
trimeter.
Like, the thing with Dickinson is that she had so many unpublished stuff, so they put all of it in here. It's kind of similar with Keats. When we did Keats stuff, they put everything in the complete works of Keats. So, not all of it is good. Not all of it is masterpieces, like her masterpieces that we get taught in school and stuff in a basic kind of English curriculum. But, like, seeing how she developed this, like, you're not going to be a perfect, great poet right away. Like, you have to spend a few years working up to this and then kind of finding your own way. Like, and it's clear that she did that very quickly, at least by the record of the stuff that we have here in this book. And just, when I got to these kind of 10, 11, 12 poems in, you're starting that is becoming very apparent to me. And that's just why I started marking it. Do you want to read one of these or talk about one of these?
Yeah, sure.
Which one? I'll do 10, 11, or 12, whichever one you want.
I really struggled with 10 a little bit. I felt kind of dumb. That one's my wheel is in the dark. I cannot see a spoke, yet know its dripping feet go round and round. My foot is on the tide. That feels very Dickinson to me. My foot is on the tide.
I did see something in Vendler's that she never actually saw the ocean.
Really?
Because she never really left that town. But I don't know if that's speculation or not, because she was upper class. She could have traveled, kind of any time to a beach house or like a shore house or something for the summer, like the upper classes would do then. But, they still do now. But, Yeah. I just, in 1858, and then number 11 is where I saw, again, this kind of, just like a number 2, you start to see her key, like her kind of like... I say key as if it's like music, but like you start to see just like her style with, I never told the berry gold upon the hill that lies. I saw the sun, his plunder done, crouched low to guard his prize. He stood as near as you stood here, a pace had been between. Did but a snake bisect the brake, my life had forfeit been. That was a wondrous booty, I hoped 'twas honest gained. Those were the fairest ingots that ever kissed the spade. Whether to keep the secret, whether to reveal, whether as I ponder, kid will sudden sail. Could a shrewd advise me, we might even divide. Should a shrewd betray me, atropos decide. And you just see that kind of music, right? Like you just see this kind of built-in rhythm that forces your reading with this. And then when we get into the M dashes here as well, the rhythmic use of them. And this is all over scholarship. Anybody that's remotely interested can get into this, but like, you notice that first here she's using the M dashes more in towards the end rhymes to imply either the abrupt stop or the hold. And then as we move along, as we'll talk about here, it starts to move into the poem. Like it starts to be used inside the different stanzas, like internally, not just on the end lines, not just as like a little, like it starts to pace the poem. So using this kind of, and you could use commas and stuff like this for this too, right? But like she used dashes, and she's really responsible for making the M dash this, I would say, like kind of like a rhythmic thing into poetry. Like she's kind of, the godfather of that, or the godmother of that, whatever you want to say, I would say. And like these three little poems here, 10, 11, 12, are the ones that Sophie and I was curious to see which ones would overlap. It's interesting that they're in the same area but different poems, you know?
Do you know who Kid is?
No. But I guess it's clearly a name.
I mean, it sounds like a tale, right? Or like kind of a story about treasure to some degree, right? At least on top. That was a wondrous booty I hoped was honest gained. Those were the fairest ingots that ever kissed the spade. Ingots, blocks of metal. Whether to keep the secret, whether to reveal, whether as I ponder, Kid will sudden sail.
Well, yeah, I mean, the buried gold upon the hill.
Captain Kidd's treasure. So, maybe this is a reference.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. Well, she's using gold and the kind of, right, by which she means you could say literal gold and jewels, right, ingots. But she's talking more with like kind of the nature too, right? I never told the buried gold upon the hill that lies. I saw the sun his plunder done, crouch low to guard his prize. So we kind of see this kind of gold, but also the sun, right? Like kind of same thing. And then we kind of have the nature images, right? And there is this kind of like,
I do sometimes wonder, I never told the buried gold, or I never told of the buried gold, because she does drop language a lot, right? She does drop words. But, on the face of it, I would read it as I never, like, as if she was talking to the gold. That is my inclination, but,
Well, I mean, that's if we're taking it as literal gold,
yeah,
right? Like,
maybe.
Yeah. But, yeah. I just thought, yeah, that you're starting to see this kind of refinement come into her work, and I thought that was really great.
Yeah, I mean, the next poem, the morns are meeker than they were, the nuts are getting brown, the berry's cheek is plumper, the rose is out of town. So this is a seasons poem, right? And we see a lot of this. We see a lot of seasons over the next, I don't know how many poems, and maybe that's where I sort of started to get feeling a little burnt out on it. Because you sort of get into the rhythm of understanding, like, okay, this is the phase she's in. She's talking about, the changing of the seasons. And
right.
That did make me wonder a little bit about the order of the poems, because I was like, oh, is she just like writing about nothing but the seasons for this period?
Well,
but
I think
we don't know.
Yeah.
Also, I don't know how quickly she composed these, right? I mean, I didn't pay as much attention to the dates.
I think at some point they again, we can only estimate because we don't know, but I think we're guessing educated guesses. Vendler said that apparently in 1862, that one where we pointed out she wrote 366 poems in that packet that was dated 1862, she was probably composing a poem or two a day, to get that many in a year. Now, she didn't have to work. She was upper class. She could sit around all day staring out the window and compose poems, right? So we're envious of that. That's a great thing to have if you want to be a writer. But yeah, I think when you see all these poems on the season, right, keep in mind she wasn't trying, and I'm talking to listeners, but keep in mind she wasn't trying to publish these. Like, so if you write 100 poems on the seasons and there's one that's a masterpiece, right, so you're writing 100 poems on the season to get that one that she wanted to publish, kind of thing. And, just good to see, like, it's just interesting to see a great kind of master of the craft work up to it. You don't just start out as a master. You have to work up to it. You have to write 100 poems about the changing seasons until you get that masterpiece that was like, oh yeah, that hit it on the head. You know what I mean? Like sometimes you have to write 100 of these things. So I felt that too. Like Sophie said, I felt this kind of burnout because the topics are all the same. But, we are reading the complete works, so these aren't like all the bangers. As Sophie and I were saying, we want to read bangers.
We're in it for the bangers, guys. I'm sorry.
And everybody is, but
and there are
they
few
can't
that
all
I
be
think
bangers.
Are interesting.
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of those.
You have to write a few stinkers to get to the bangers. Like you got to write a few bad ones, or not even bad, but not as good. I do think 10 is
interesting, but I want to we can come back to that one maybe.
Yeah, we move on.
I want to move forward.
And
You
is
know,
there
12
anything?
is sort of just like, I assumed that one was about fall. No?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's pretty fair. I
The
mean, we
maple
could go a
wears
little
grayer
deeper.
scarf, the field a scarlet gown.
Yeah, it's about the fall coming. The roses out
Lest
of town.
I should be old-fashioned, I'll put a trinket on. You know, fall is
Yeah.
fashion is
Yeah.
the one note I made.
Yeah, fuck it. What else do you have marked? I have number 28. I have
Yeah, let me get the list.
49. What else did I do? I wrote pages for a lot of days, but of course I didn't as I was reading through this.
I mostly just wrote the numbers of the poems.
What do you have?
Okay.
Or what do you want to hit as we kind of move along? Because then, there were periods where I didn't mark anything for a while.
Yeah,
like,
me too.
I marked 49, and then I didn't mark anything till like 150.
25 is one that I marked as but I think I sent that one to you. That one was, she slept beneath a tree, remembered but by me. I touched her cradle mute. She recognized the foot, put on her carmine suit at sea.
Yeah. And again, it reads, like Sophie said, as like a little exercise poem, right?
Yeah.
Like it reads as if it was just a little, in the moment, write it down. And, it probably
And
was,
maybe a little
right?
play with foot, right? And mute
Yeah.
and cradle.
And her usual style,
music,
but yeah.
right?
But not like the masterpieces. But yeah, I know what you mean, yeah. 28 was the one I marked right there. It's weird because we keep marking things in the same sections, but they're different poems. But
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah,
You
I
marked
like that.
28, I think.
This is one I want to try and memorize as try out Bloom's theory on memorizing poetry.
26 was one I enjoyed. It's all I have to bring today. This and my heart beside. This and my heart and all the fields and all the meadows wide. Maybe I marked it because I already knew it. I feel like this is one that as I was reading, I couldn't have told you from memory that I knew it, but as I was reading, I was like, yeah, I know this one.
And when you look at it, it is pretty perfect. Like, not that it's the best poem in here, but like the structure is perfect. Like everything metrical,
Be sure
everything
you
rhymed.
can't, should I forget, someone the sum could tell. This and my heart and all the bees which in the clover dwell.
Right.
You know,
Not the most interesting in terms of subject matter that she's talking about, but like you said, I think it's pretty perfect. Like,
yeah,
this
and you can
little
always go deeper.
and it's small. It's getting to that small size, right? We're
All
starting
of
to see
these
these
things
really
which
small.
in the clover dwell. You know,
Well, and just like the first couple poems, they were a little bit longer, and she kind of wavered between a couple stanzas and then a single stanza type poems. But like this one, we're starting to see single stanza poems. We're starting to see little tiny, almost nursery rhyme things, and that's why again they strike me as a little bit of practice. But then they're not bad poems, right? Like these are technically kind of perfect poems, and they're just little ones. So 26, number 28, I think is another one. That's like these are all ones that I think listeners, if you're listening, ones to commit to memory. Just because little things that you could use throughout the day, right? 28. So has a daisy vanished from the fields today? So tiptoed many a slipper to paradise away. Ooze so in crimson bubbles, day's departing tide, blooming, tripping, flowing. Are ye then with God? Yeah, just.
yeah, she does some funny stuff when she talks about God in the early poems.
Yeah, and Vendler's obsessed with that, and I mean for good reason, because clearly, she was raised in the 19th century, very Christian, upper class. She was probably force-fed the Bible, was, having to read it every day at dinner or whatever, around the table or something. That kind of Massachusetts Puritanism still baked into the cake, right, at this time, even though it's like, a couple hundred years after. But yeah, and then there's a lot of scholars talk about her she was, one of the big bold things she did at the time was reject the kind of Christian authority that was everywhere, right? And this was a theme in art all through kind of the 19th century and into the 20th century when Christianity was really kind of dominant in cultural stuff, and people were a little bit like, come on, like a lot of the baby boomer art in the 60s and stuff like this, like is very, anti-Christian, and because again that was an oppressive force at the time, much more oppressive than what we deal with now,
Well, and
I remember my parents telling me
God, I
stories
don't
that you
remember
couldn't
what they
disrespect
called
the
her,
cloth.
what
Like
she
if you
was.
disrespected the cloth, like
But when
you
she
were
was at
getting that,
Holyoke,
you know.
I think, I think there was maybe a disappointment that she was in her that she could not believe. That she was not a believer, or
Right.
that she struggled to be. And so,
I mean, it is hard to have blind faith in things, right? Like,
yeah, but there was not just that it was hard, but that she, I think, felt like she was like left out of something in some way, and is constantly sort of searching for a way.
I think a lot of writers, I think some of the best writers have that internal struggle of, if you feel comfortable in like a little group or a clique, like, you're not going to write as good a stuff as if you're always constantly uncomfortable and you can't really find a clique. You don't know where you really quite fit in. I think that's where we get some of the best stuff in art, is where these people don't quite fit in with all this other stuff. But
I didn't mark another one until 33.
do you want to hit it?
If recollecting were forgetting, then I remember not. And if forgetting recollecting, how near I had forgot. And if to miss were merry, and to mourn were gay, how very blithe the fingers that gathered this today. That one just feels very much like a playfulness with language that I think is very much still Dickinson, but like a really early attempt at that kind of playfulness in language. If recollecting were forgetting, then I remember not.
Yeah, and all of these last couple that we just hit are all estimated to be composed around 1858. So again, we're saying that, like, structurally these poems are there, stylistically they're there, but they're not quite as good as the bangers that we learn about in school and stuff like that, right? But like, I always stress, it has to be written. Like, you have to write these little practice poems. You have to write these little things to get to those masterpieces. They're not just going to happen,
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is maybe kind of hard to just say precisely what she's saying, but, we have if recollecting were forgetting, then I remember not. So as if, like, literally if we were to switch these things, well, I remember not, and that's a recollection, right? I don't remember this thing that happened. And if forgetting is recollecting, I'm adding the word is here, right? How near I had forgot, right? Because when you recollect, oh God, I should have written down my original formulation. It took me a while to parse this out. If you're remembering, it's like, oh, how nearly I had forgotten it, right? But, like, you can see it, right? Like, you can see sort of she's just playing with the ideas of forgetting and remembering. Yeah. It doesn't feel quite perfect. And she's also just playing with, like, oppositions, right? Like, mournfulness and, to be gay, right? To be happy.
Yeah.
But as something like, you cannot forget something without having memory, right? And you can't be mournful if there's no such thing as, like, the opposite of mournfulness. So, and that's a dynamic that we see throughout. A lot of these tend to point me toward the zeros taught us phosphorus, right? Or
what's that?
A later poem, the zeros taught us phosphorus. I don't remember what number it is.
We'll get to it. We don't have to.
Yeah, but that's one where it's like she's playing with those sort of oppositions, right? Cold taught us warmth, right? You learn cold from, she's sort of playing with the idea that that's really kind of simple if you think about it. Like, oh yeah, that, like, the idea that you can only be happy because there's such thing as sadness, right? That's the central idea, I think, that she plays with in a lot of these sort of wordplay poems. I think, dials it in more in a poem like The Zeros Taught Us Phosphorus.
But, like, even that, like, I think, we should talk about this. Like, Dickinson's a lyric poet, right? Like we would say.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, very formal. I don't know.
Well, I just mean in
Not
terms.
exclusively, but sure.
Yeah, but I just mean in terms of like this idea of this. Get back to kind of like our color episode. Listeners can go back and listen to that. Like with this idea of lyric not having to make a kind of narrative sense, right? But what we get out of it is the music, the appreciation. And I think there's a lot to Emily Dickinson's rhythm that just hits me in a sweet spot. It's almost like pop music or something, you know, it just hits you in that kind of nursery rhyme way where, and I'm not saying her poems are nursery rhymes, you know, I'm just saying it hits you in that kind of same way when you're a child and you hear these pleasing, goofy rhymes, you know, like in a nursery rhyme type thing. And it just kind of is like a pleasing little, yeah, and sometimes she is experimenting with this kind of telling a story. She's using a lot of imagery and things like that, and we can read into it, right? We can interpret, but I was thinking about that as I was reading through this. If we call these lyric, you know, what is it about Dickinson that we're like, oh, and I was just thinking about, like I'm drawn to her because of this kind of perfect little rhymed meter that she does and how uniquely it's her. So like nobody else can do this meter without sounding like Emily Dickinson. Nobody else can copy this now without everybody being like, oh, you're just copying Dickinson. Like, because it's so original at the time. It was so good. Even if it wasn't super original, she made it her own, right? Like
and we all know, like, I mean, every time I read Dickinson, that's what happens, right? I can feel that I'm just copying Dickinson.
Right. You want to because it's so
you do
pleasing.
Want to.
Yeah.
And it's really pleasing to the ear. And it becomes really easy to fall into a similar formula. And then it's frustrating, right? Because it's hard to make it your own. It's really hard to take someone like Dickinson and who really is, I think, you know, the person that I think of who historically, you know, had this many poems that sounded like this, right? But then in, say, like, you know, maybe 10 poems later, poem 43, we see like a strangeness with rhythm. And she gets playful with rhythm in places. This is a place where I feel like it didn't quite feel as smooth, but I still liked the poem. It reminds me of other places where I felt like her rhythm was a little bit different, or but still, like, this one makes me think of we dream, it is good we are dreaming, it would kill us were we awake. That's another later one. But 43 is could live, did live, could die, did die, could smile upon the whole through faith in one he met not to introduce his soul. Could go from scene familiar to an untraversed spot. So you want to add like you want to add stresses in weird places. So this is also something that she does. Could contemplate the journey with an unpuzzled heart. Such trust had one among us not today. We who saw the launching never sailed the bay. I marked this one mostly for rhythm, but this again feels like you know, a poem about faith, right? Playing with the idea of faith. Through faith in one he met not, right? Such trust had one among us not today. We who saw the launching never sailed the bay. So, you know, I automatically go to God here, right? Faith in God as one who is not here. It's just sort of blind faith. We who saw the launching never sailed the bay. Is there something in particular that you make of those lines?
I think I think you're right in terms of, I guess we could argue faith in terms of this, but yeah,
I was trying to pin down we who saw the launching, right? The launching of a ship, I assume.
Yeah.
Never sailed the bay.
The only type of launching I
sort
think there
of
would be
belief in something that you haven't done, but like also that's something that you can believe, right? Like that's something but you can see. Well, I guess she's never seen. We who saw the launching, if it's the launching of a ship into the sea, which is like kind of a weird word. That's why I'm hesitant. But either way, I I think it's a fun poem. I think it's an interesting one that kind of shows how she does play with rhythm. It isn't always that. It isn't always as formulaic as it feels, right? Elsewhere, and so you do have these pretty tight little poems where it feels very much like it's sticking to a meter. It's sticking to mostly a hard rhyme. Then you have moments like this where the tone is almost like it's a little bit funny. Could live, did live. Could die, did die. You know, like it almost feels funny.
Yeah.
Playing with the idea of could versus did, right? The idea of belief. Could one live? Did they live? You know, and how changing that phrase suggests a certain amount of faith in something having happened.
Yeah.
Right. I just think that's a fun little playful one. I marked poems 47 through 50. I do not know why. At this point, I think I was reading in the dark. Let's see. This is like where we are. Yeah, we're getting into God and death a lot here. There aren't any poems, I think, in that chunk that I really cared that much for.
Yeah, I didn't mark many until I went through like page 71, poem number 150. I marked that one, but I marked that as like an example of, okay, we're moving from 1858 to 1859, and we're seeing the refinement kind of thing happen, you know, as you're reading through this collection.
Looking for, I feel like, there are a lot here. What number did you say that you marked?
I marked 150. At least for me, reading through this all at once. I did this in chunks, listeners, because, again, like Sophie said, when you're reading kind of on the same things, the same themes over and over again, you can get a little bogged down by it. So I did break this up into like 50-page chunks, about the size of a poetry book, right, for each one. At least I tried to do as we cut into the first 200 pages here.
Oh, yeah.
And I just noticed as during my second sitting, you know, reading the next 50 pages here, as we moved in from, 1858 to 1859, to me, there was nothing like particularly special about it other than that's the poem where I started to be like, oh, okay, I'm seeing it. You know what I mean? As I was reading through. But I didn't know if you had anything around there or around like that 1859 as we move through. Because I have another one around that same time, although it looks like it moved right into 160 or 1860 here, because I liked 165 too.
Because right around there, we have faith is a fine invention.
What number?
That one was that's 185. So let's go a little bit before that, because I know I have ones before that. Yeah, we have 165, a wounded deer leaps highest.
Yeah, and this was one I pointed out because it was one that I thought kind of shows... What did I write down here? I wrote down a good example of a poem starting off very strongly, as all of her stuff does. She has a lot of first line bangers, and then I think kind of crumbles in on itself. At least that was me reading through it here. See what we think as we reread it together. But it struck me as a little bit as, and as some of these, as we already pointed out, feel like practice poems, feel like unfinished. Maybe it was just little practice verses that she was writing down, etc. A wounded deer leaps highest. I've heard the hunter tell, 'tis but the ecstasy of death, and then the break is still. The smitten rock that gushes, the trampled steel that springs. A cheek is always redder, just where the hectic stings. Mirth is the mail of anguish, in which it cautious arm, lest anybody spy the blood, and you're hurt exclaim.
Yeah. So what doesn't work for you here?
For me, the shift from that one stanza here where we have 3 stanzas, it looks like, although I guess that's a page change, so I can't necessarily tell.
The hectic stings. Mirth is the mail of anguish. That felt like the summing up of this poem to me. Mirth is the mail of anguish.
And it's that third stanza is where I think...
mail, M-A-I-L, just for reference.
And that little bit of change up there between the first two stanzas and the last stanza is where I thought it started to weaken when I first read this. But, I mean, what do you think?
I think this is a pretty solid one. A wounded deer leaps highest, I've heard the hunter tell. 'Tis but the ecstasy of death. And then the break is still. Just playing with it seems like sort of an interplay between the greatest life and the greatest sort of violence of life, right? Between death and life, right? The smitten rock that gushes. I'm not sure of that one. That line, I don't quite understand. The trampled steel that springs. A cheek is always redder just where the hectic stings. Right.
Well, the smitten rock that gushes, I think, could be Bible reference,
Yeah.
Tapping the rock to get the water, that Bible story.
Well, fuck, I don't know that. This is what I rely on you for.
I will say this to listeners, if you don't know the Christian myths, if you don't,
knowing
it
them
makes
helps.
it harder. Yeah, it makes reading Western literature harder.
For not knowing them. But I thought those last 4 lines were tight, and I thought the first 4 lines were tight. And I agree that those middle 4, maybe not so much. I am guessing this is a 3-stanza poem.
That's what it looks like it is. I just didn't want to assume because there's that page split that maybe that. But it looks like it's so even with the 4 lines, that it has to be a the third stanza. To me, it just got a little bit jumbled there, but then reading it again.
The second is like, meh, but I still think it's solid, right? Like, I still think this is... I think that's more solid than a poem that maybe is really clear, but is kind of boring. And again, this one reminds me a lot of something that she does later really well. Water is taught by thirst, right? So the later poems, the zeros taught us phosphorus, where she starts to play with the language there. Instead of just saying water taught us thirst, instead of saying the cold taught us warmth, she says the zeros taught us phosphorus. And that's where she sort of gets really playful with language later on in her life. And I think we start to see more and more of that as we go on. But yeah.
And this is when we're moving into 1860 here.
Yeah.
So just more refinement, more kind of finding that formula that we know to be hers. Then you said you marked something around here. I marked 187. What?
I want to say I maybe marked like 1.
Oh, you did Faith is a Fine Invention.
I mean, I marked that just because that one was like an obvious little banger, really short one. If you don't know it, read it. I mean, I think that's just a good example of sort of just how like she can be kind of funny, right?
This and it, this was 1862. So when you think about what was happening in 1860, right, we're starting to get the first kind of real hard sciences kind of
and you see that she's really
pushing
interested
back
in that.
against the faith. So if you were educated upper class at that time, you were understanding and getting articles, on the Atlantic and things like that, with the latest science developments and things, but you were also still kind of, preoccupied with the faith, the kind of Christian story and all of that. So it was this kind of time where that was, we talked about this when we did Keats, this kind of that the romantics were big on this in the early part of that, of the 19th century there. But, it's a good little one that just, it's another good one you could memorize.
Yeah, it's an easy one to memorize, right? Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen, or when gentlemen can see. I always want to say for gentlemen who see. I wonder if there's like another copy of this poem in a Norton or something. Faith is a fine invention when gentlemen can see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency. It's just a fun little playful one. I don't think we need to pick that one apart.
And 187 on the next page, 88 there, was one where I thought that it just was a good example of her M dashes starting to get this kind of pacing and punctuation use. Like, I think in 187, it's almost all M dashes apart from the final exclamation point in terms of punctuation. And it was just a good example of that, I thought.
Yeah, do you want to talk about it?
I mean, not more than that, just in terms of how
I didn't make any
she...
notes on that one. How many times these low feet staggered. I think Vendler has this one.
Yeah, only the soldered mouth can tell. Try, can you stir the awful rivet? Try, can you lift the hasps of steel? Stroke the cool forehead, hot so often. Lift, if you care, the listless hair. Handle the adamantine fingers. Never a thimble more shall wear. Buzz the dull flies on the chamber window. Brave, shines the sun through the freckled pane. Fearless, the cobweb swings from the ceiling. Indolent housewife in Daisy's lane. And this, when you hear me pause in that, listeners, there's where the M dashes were. And she has them at the end of the line, but then they're very in the line, too, where she has these isolated words, try, in the first stanza. And then, brave in that last stanza, lift, like these kinds of,
Yeah, this reminds me of another later famous poem.
Right, well, that's what I mean. We see this happening
Again,
now.
like,
This
I
is
heard
1860.
a fly buzz when I died.
And then that
really,
later stuff.
I hear an echo of that poem in this earlier one. So
Right.
I think maybe that's the most interesting thing to me about reading her collected work, is that in these early poems, you do see like the beginnings of something that emerges later. I feel like a broken record saying this, but that's one of the things that really becomes exciting about really knowing any poet, is sort of watching their evolution from the beginnings of those ideas, sort of planting little seeds, and then sort of years and years later, maybe becoming just a more complex and tight and interesting poem from something that maybe was a little bit less interesting, or maybe not less interesting, but like not as popular.
And technically interesting, like technically kind of this kind of experimentation with these M dashes to pace out the reading. And this is something we complain about a lot on this podcast we see in contemporary poetry, is that there's very little attention paid to how you want the reader to read the poem, right? It's just they haphazardly smash this kind of phrase into the page and break it arbitrarily into lines and things like that, and stanzas, where they're not taking advantage of all the tools in the toolbox here, like Dickinson is, where this kind of using the punctuation to guide the reader through the rhythm kind of thing, how you want it to be read, how you want things to be emphasized. And it's just something that is neglected in contemporary poetry, and you see Dickinson so good at it here. There was a section in the 1860 poems, as we're going through them here, with page 100 and page 102. It was poem 216, and I marked poem 222. And the reason I marked 216 on page 100 is because that's one of the few in this book up until now that we get two versions of, where we get an 1859 version and an 1861.
Safe in their alabaster chambers.
Yeah. And this is one of the ones she sent, right, to Higginson. So there
and
are
one
these
of these
two...
is the version that we know, right? And it's the second one. And I think there's good reason for that.
The first one is the one that Higginson edited, it looks like, in 1862.
The first one?
Yeah.
I mean...
So that was first published in 1862, and then the
okay.
second version was published in 1890 in that collection that her, niece or grandniece or whatever put out.
But I would say the two versions are really different. Like, not just a few changes, it's like a whole difference of stanza. Like, the whole second stanza is entirely different, and entirely different tonally.
And this is why I got so pissed off about that Roald Dahl shit, dude, is that these fucking people, these fucking editors get their greedy little hands off of these fucking works of art. Just stop trying to fuck with it. You're not going to make it better. You're not going to make it more appealing to people. Like, you are ruining it if you try to keep adding your thoughts on what should be done to an artist's work. It's incredible arrogance. It's incredible. And this Higginson should be rightly taken to task for what he did on this stuff. So there's that. I don't know if you wanted to spend too much time talking about it, but I thought that was interesting how we got the two versions that we could see.
Yeah, I
And
just
clearly, Dickinson's original version is superior. And this is what I mean. So this guy, Higginson, who the fuck is he? The only reason we know him is because what? Because he fucking fucked up Emily Dickinson's poems. You know, he didn't do shit. Like,
yeah, but I think also her second version, right, with the other second stanza. So you probably know, safe in their alabaster chambers, untouched by morning and untouched by noon, sleep the meek members of the resurrection, rafter of satin and roof of stone. That's mostly the same as the second one that just says lies the meek members instead of sleep. But this second stanza is really different. Light laughs the breeze in her castle above them, babbles the bee in a stolid ear, pipe the sweet birds in ignorant cadence. Ah, what sagacity perished here. It's really, really different tonally from grand go the years in the crescent above them. Worlds scoop their arcs and firmaments row. Row? I think row. Yeah. Diadems drop and doges surrender, soundless as dots on a disk of snow. Quieter, but also sort of more muscular feeling to me, and more serious, less. The first version felt, I don't know, like it maybe was trying to be playful or like funny, or I don't know, like it was, but the second version feels like more serious, like it's going larger. I mean, grand go the years is a great line in a way to talk about how the world sort of moves on without you after death.
yeah. And then I did number 222 because that was just out of the regular form that she had been writing in, especially as we move into 1860, 1861 here.
Really different.
And this one actually has a question mark by the date of 1861, so I guess that's just a rough estimate. And this one is so different, it resembles some of the earlier style more so than what she was kind of working herself up to at this point. So I just thought it was unusual. Like she was just kind of trying it out, or maybe it was one that just got scattered in there. And it really isn't that good, you know, but just didn't know what we thought of that.
I mean, I think it's just like her being playful about like a girl that she knows and is maybe being pursued by two people. Or maybe I'm reading it too literally. I don't know.
No, I mean, I think that could be it. That's what I mean. It just the style of it and the way it's laid out on the page is so different from.
It's really different. It's
stood out
rhythmically different. When Katie walks, the simple pair accompany her side. When Katie runs, unwearied, they follow on the road. When Katie kneels, their loving hands still clasp her pious knee. Ah, Katie, smile at fortune with two so knit to thee. It's sort of similar. It really, as I read it out loud, does feel very similar to her other poems, but it does look very different on the page. The lines are longer. It's only 4 lines. She has other poems that are 4 lines, but are much, much briefer. Right?
I gotta pee real quick.
Yeah, all right, I'll pee too. Go on.
It was around page 104 that I started to see this kind of use of the M dashes really explode, almost too much.
She gets excited.
And pretty much from poem like 224 to poem 230, it's just kind of this endless kind of overuse of M dashes. But this is again moving into 1861. But you can see how she's not using them. When I say that they're overused, it's clear she's not using them just too haphazardly. She's playing with it. I think it's very obvious. You can tell she's experimenting with what these dashes can actually do on the page with a poem. And I just thought that was great. You know, we don't have to go into all of those, but just a little something to keep in mind here. And then I marked...
Oh, yeah, they really explode here.
Yeah, 235 is pretty egregious, and even 232, 230.
I thought 234 was all right though. I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're not bad. I just mean, like, in terms of the use of the...
Like, that was all. I thought it was really funny to see the phrase, I guess,
Yeah.
in a Dickinson poem. So that one made me laugh. I actually sent that one to a few people. You're right. The way is narrow. And that's in quotes. And I had to look this up. This is some Jesus shit that I don't know about. And difficult the gate, and few there be, correct again, that enter in thereat. 'Tis costly, so are purples. 'Tis just the price of breath, with but the discount of the grave, termed by the brokers death. And after that there's heaven, the good man's dividend. And bad men go to jail, I guess.
Yeah.
That's just funny, right? Like, that's just her being funny.
Yeah.
And, like, responding to what I think is maybe, like, a Jesus speech, supposedly. Check me on that. I don't know about Jesus. So, if you know about Jesus, lay it on me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a really funny way to respond to an idea of, like, heaven and hell, and end with, I guess, you know, I don't know, sure, I guess. Like, it's really funny. And it's not something that I expect to see even in Emily Dickinson, who is very playful. Of course, 241, real banger. I like a look of agony. And that one's really tight, right? I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Men do not sham convulsion nor simulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead of homely anguish strung. And that one is easy to memorize. Strongly recommend it. And, like, kind of fucked up. I like a look of agony because I know it's true. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, pretty dark.
I think that's why people are attracted to Dickinson in the
Yeah,
same way
I
they're
mean-
attracted to a lot of the big writers that we've covered on this pod so far. I mean, I'm sure we all know there's many more that we haven't covered, but yeah, I think that's what it is because, she always talks about the truth. There's that famous quote of hers, right? The truth is so rare, it's delightful to tell it. And,
What a line. And that's the thing. Like, she's a poet that, while I think often in contemporary poetry we will be really quick to say, you can't speak in abstraction, right? Like, you have to earn that right. Like, you can't just write beauty, and you can't just write anguish, right? You have to earn those words. And I think with Emily Dickinson, she kind of shows us, well, that might not really be true, right? You can be good at it. And I think that's the other thing that attracts us to her, is that she's unafraid to hit these big things. Well, we say unafraid, but really we don't know. Like, she's just writing in the terms she knows, right? And I think she does it really well. And I think it's that she talks about such big things in such large terms. I like a look of agony. She's not referring to a specific look. She's not referring to a specific instance. She's not just describing it. She does at the end, right? The beads upon the forehead of homely anguish strung. She's giving us an image of, like, sweating, right? I think she does it really well, but she starts with the abstraction. I think that's something that she does a lot. That in a contemporary poetry workshop we would maybe not welcome so readily. And so I think that's really interesting. I think that's a really good, tight little poem. And of course everyone does. It's one that's really very canonized, right? We see it in all the anthologies. So it's a good one.
And on
Certainly one of my favorites.
Yeah, on page 123, number 270, that was the one where, again, as I was reading through here, 50-page chunks, it was like, I was like, oh yeah, this is everything we love about Dickinson working. And
oh yeah, I marked that one too.
Yeah.
And also, even I think there are a couple I marked before that.
Yeah, because this is
There's
where
a
we're
certain
getting
slant
it
of
in.
light,
Yeah.
you know, that's where you're starting to hit like a banger. Every few poems you get, there's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons. Oh, added a word there by accident, but you know the one.
Yeah, Sophie and I were texting about this too. We're like, when you reach that point here, and it's right around the 1861, 100 pages into this or so, we get, we start to see her voice be fully realized, and this kind of full-throated,
Oh yeah.
way that is very distinct and very Emily Dickinson. And it's just wonderful to be able to go back and read a book like this from the very beginning, those little scraps that she probably had no desire to ever publish, those little scraps that we were talking about. And then see something like this, number 270 on page 123, just be
And a lot that feel
perfect.
like really quintessential
Yeah,
Dickinson
yeah.
openings too. A single screw of flesh is all that pins the soul, is how 263 starts, and then 264, a weight with needles on the pounds to push and pierce besides. I mean, these feel very quintessential Dickinson in terms of their syntax and the way that she's maybe getting a little bit more specific, maybe a little bit less like where the same way that I used, I don't remember what she says. We learn cold from blah, 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 or like we learn something from something. And it seemed really basic early on, and maybe like a really early formulation of something like the zeros taught us phosphorus, which was a playful way to say the cold teaches us heat.
Yeah, and just,
Yeah.
So 270, the reason, and again, Sophie's pointed out like these couple poems before it, and then even poems after it, and even the most exciting part about reading this book is that even if we're right here on page 123 of a 700 plus page book of all of Dickinson's work, it just gets better from here. Like it just keeps getting more exciting, more perfect, more in tune, like more unique, more individually, uniquely hers kind of thing. And I just, all the M dashes are working in this one. This one there's quite a bit of M dashes, but they're not overused. Like in those poems I pointed out around page, 100, 102, around there where you could tell her experimenting more with the M dashes, but it wasn't quite working as well as it's working in these last couple, like Sophie pointed out, 264, 263, 270, like this section of 1861 compositions where we're starting to see, oh yeah, and this is around the time, right, when she is sending off letters to Higginson's, right, like to try and see, am I any good, right? Am I good enough to get published in these magazines where the other poets are getting published, kind of thing,
Yeah.
And you can
Well,
see
and
it.
even
She
then,
felt
it
that
was like-
confidence. You can read it in these works, and it's just a great thing to be able to go back and read it uncensored, by the way, in these works. Yeah.
Supposedly there was a period of her life in her correspondence with Higginson. I don't remember what I had noted. Let me look really quickly. But there was like a period of time during which it is believed that she pretty much accepted, at least from, I guess, scholars who've read her letters, where she really accepted that she would not be a very published poet in her lifetime.
Interesting. So she wrote about that, in her letters.
Yeah, between April and June of their correspondence.
Was that?
I don't
And that was
remember the
62,
years.
61.
She seems to have accepted she would not gain a reputation during her lifetime.
Sorry, I jumped the gun. It was 62 when she contacted Higginson for the first
Yeah,
time. So we're a little
so,
before that, but it's getting there. Yeah. What were you saying?
Yeah,
Sorry.
so yeah, I mean, I just think that's interesting, right? Like, it's not just, am I good enough to be published? It was like, right when she wrote to him initially, she wanted to know if her poems breathe, if they were true, right, in her words.
Right. Yeah.
If what she was doing was not just in a publishable way, but could be legitimate in some larger, truer sense of that word, right? Beyond, I think her concern was not just to publish, but she wanted the art to be true, right? Whatever you wanted to take that to mean. Was there life in them more
Right.
than could I publish this? Which you might argue are kind of the same,
Dude, you and
fine,
I, we talk about this, when you've mentioned this a few times, and I know not just on this podcast, but just you and me giving, poems back and forth, works back and forth, this, is it true? And I'm interested in this idea because we hear people say this. We hear people say this about fiction writing and poetry, like, oh, it's honest, right? Or, oh, and what do they mean by that?
What the fuck does that actually
mean? Do they mean
it's
true, right? And then we go, okay, well, what is true, right? Like this kind of, and I don't want to get into
and I don't think honest and true are the same at all, and I don't think anyone would really disagree with me there, right? Those, like, you can be honest without saying something true, right? Like you can say something that you honestly believe without it being like true.
Yeah,
right? We see that all the time.
Sure.
So I think there's some difference there. Not that they're like.
What would you?
But
I guess let's just focus on truth. What do we think?
Yeah,
true?
like I mean.
What does she mean? What do we think we mean? We're not going to get to the bottom, but just talk.
I don't think she means like that these poems are saying things that are true, but necessarily as much as are they. Is there enough force in them to, like, in the words of our teacher, lift off the page, right? Like to sort of take on a life of their own. Do they feel like real poems? Do they feel like legitimate literature? Could she pass?
Feel that. I think that's the most important. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I heard someone say, like, is what I'm doing a legitimate way of doing poetry, basically, is what there was. I don't remember who it was, but it was someone in one of the documentaries I watched. I'd be curious to see other interpretations of that too, because I'm not particularly nailed down to one, right? I don't really actually know enough. I'd love to read more of her letters and sort of maybe get a sense of that, or read that initial letter for myself again.
And I like that you said how it feels, because we talk about this all the time on this podcast. We're going to keep talking about it because this is, a big thing. And this is part of what makes talking about art so much fun, is that what we're mostly talking about is our reaction to a piece of art, right? And this feeling of, that kind of, it's hard to explain. And this is why it gets so kind of hazy, and there's all kinds of arguments and stuff, and people get upset. But it's like, there is this, like, you're feeling some type of transference from the author who composed these words together on the page to yourself, kind of thing. And we don't really know what to call that. You know what I mean? And
Emily Dickinson would have called it as feeling as though the top of her head was taken right off, right?
Or as you said, feel true, right? Or feel like this kind of... And
feel true, again, is different from is true, right? Like,
I mean, we're not talking fact-checking. Yeah, we're talking...
Right. And I'm rarely concerned with that in poems, and that's actually
I'm not even concerned with it in fiction, poetry.
Right,
I don't give a fuck about fact-checking.
I think one of the things that makes poetry very interesting, because it is a place where we have a tendency to make these giant lofty claims in the absence of a clear fictional character onto whom we can, like, put that belief, right? We can say, oh, well, that's not mine. It's, the speaker, right? That's there, and we say it, but we are more inclined, I think, typically to analyze and say, like, oh, there's, we're supposed to, like, there's a sense, I think, more with poetry more immediately, and maybe also true of, like, the literary novel, that it gets at some, like, big question about life, right? Whether or not it tells you what the correct thing to think is a wholly other question.
Yeah. And even that necessarily, I think, is putting a little too much kind of, like, in terms of what the true, how it feels true or something. Like, it is just kind of this reaction to when you read something. And
sometimes it's like, it's the reaction that happens before understanding.
And
very often.
Yeah. And that's important too. Yeah. I want to eventually, I don't want to talk about books I haven't written yet, but I want to write a book on this eventually, a nonfiction kind of that thing, that feeling, that thing that you're feeling right there, and why it's so important, why it's so hard to talk about. It's the thing that I've been obsessed with forever. It is really hard to talk about, and it's really hard to pinpoint, and I think there are a lot of, different ways that you could go about it, whether that's like... and we've talked about that. We talked about it probably most in depth on our bonus episode, where we got a lot of writing questions from listeners. So again, listeners, you want to hear that, you got to subscribe. Patreon.com/heavyboard, where we go into, we don't get an answer. We don't know the answer, but Sophie and I go into a little bit more depth where it gets complicated between the objective kind of form and structure of writing and the art forms. But then there's something else that we call the subjectiveness of art, where it's like how you feel, how you react to a piece of art kind of determines what we call the subjective thing, right? So it's a combination of those two things, which is what makes this so kind of complicated and a little sticky when you start getting into nitpicking and you have little slight differences of opinion. But that's what things like this podcast are for. I mean, I think that's, our listeners are smart people. They want to explore these ideas just like we do, kind of thing. But yeah, I thought that was good on page 2. So I'm almost done here. I mean, we're almost to the end of this first section here. Sophie's running out of time. What else did I mark? What else did you mark?
There are other ones that I really like. I mean,
I felt a funeral in my brain.
I guess I think I'm obsessed maybe with the Zeros Toss Phosphorus. Maybe it's one of the first ones that I got really into because I marked every poem that sounds exactly like it. Your riches taught me poverty, myself a millionaire. Like, it has that same kind of formula in that first line. So I think I just marked them all. But, I mean, in the same sort of span of poems, we have also The Soul Selects Her Own Society. I mean, you probably have heard that one if you've heard any amount of Dickinson. And while it's one that we know well, this is one of the places where I feel her getting quieter and more restrained.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you mean by quiet? Explain it for
like there's more white space in between, like the distance that the lines are a little bit shorter, but the em dashes are more, creating that sort of pause. The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door to her divine majesty, present no more. So like while the lines are pretty short, those em dashes tend to elongate. And the rhythm, because I think you're trying to find the right places for that rhythm to hit, it does sort of slow you down a little bit instead of speed you up. There are rhythms that will speed you up, right? This isn't one of them.
Right, and it's instructing the reader.
And that's part of the magic, I think, of her punctuation. Even unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate, right? Like even with at her low gate being its own line, you don't want to read it quickly because you're trying to hit that rhythm a little bit, right? At her low gate, right? Though your brain just wants to do that. Your ear wants to do that. You will start hearing yourself speaking in meter on occasion as you start to read these poems, especially if you read them out loud. But I just think that's a really good one. I mean, obviously we know it's a good one, but it's one that I think is a good contrast to louder ones like we dream, it is good, we are dreaming, it would kill us were we awake, we dream, it is good, we are dreaming, it would kill us were we awake. And there's like a lot of exclamation in that one, and the lines are a little bit longer, and the rhythm is really loud, though maybe different from the obvious hymn, right? That we hear in a lot of her poems.
Well, you want to hit 128, number 280. I felt a funeral in my brain.
Oh,
another,
God.
yeah.
I mean, God,
dude, this is when we start getting to the bangers. Like that's what we were saying. Like when you reach this page, like right around page 150 or so, like, and even before then, right? We're on page 128 here, but like you start to see like, every other poem or every couple poems is like, oh shit, that's a banger. Oh shit. Like it just starts getting better and better as we go through here. And this was one I was like, oh yeah, here we go. I texted, so I was like, oh, here come the bangers, right? Like, and I thought this was just incredibly good poem. This is everything we love about Dickinson working perfectly. And we're starting to see the form take shape, and it's kind of, I wrote down, it's a thrill to see. Like I'm witnessing this history of this person's life. Like she put so much energy into this, and we're only into 1861 here too. We're not even 200 pages in here, and it's like she hasn't even contacted Higginson at this point, and the poems are just clicking. They're just fucking clicking.
yeah.
She hasn't even gotten workshop bullshit, feedback from morons sitting around a table, right? Like we always shit on here on this podcast, but it's like they're clicking, and it's just that practice, that constant doing it every day, reading your contemporaries, reading the greats, the canon, reading this stuff over and over again, and working at it. And, you know, this is a comment like I felt a funeral in my brain, or I felt a cleaving in my mind, right? Like I felt...
Right, yeah. I mean, we hear a lot of that. Or like, after great pain, a formal feeling comes, right? We get that poem in here, too.
And the mourners to and fro kept treading,
both of
treading, till
the
it seemed
funeral
that sense was
poems.
breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service, like a drum, kept beating, beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead again. Then space began to toll, as all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I and silence, some strange race, wrecked solitary here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then.
Ugh. Just so fucking good.
And this is one that Vendler points out a lot too, where she started getting this habit of not every poem, but this was around when she started getting in there, and even earlier than this, she started to do it with this kind of M dash ending the poem. You know, and there's speculation about it. What does it do? Right? We have our thoughts. Vendler argues that it's kind of a never-ending continuation.
Well, that's. I mean, but
I kind of see where she's coming from with that. But go on. Sorry.
I wish I had the words for it because it creates a feeling.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it.
And it's not there for no reason. Clearly,
and I think a sense of never-endingness is maybe touching on it. Like the word ethereal creeps in, right? Like it's like a weird suspension.
Yeah. And it's abrupt.
Where
particularly in
like,
this one.
But it also feels like you're left in it while like the poet kind of recedes. I don't know how to describe it, but it creates this feeling of grandness in a way that is maybe more solemn than you would have with an exclamation point.
Yeah, because she ends a lot of poems in exclamation
There's
points.
also like an uneasiness.
Right, and this idea of funerals, death is at the end. You could argue in that kind of metaphorical context, but structurally...
Well, and also finish knowing then and ending that statement with an M dash, it feels unfinished, right? Like
right, yeah.
It definitely creates a feeling, and it's really hard for me to describe what that feeling is. Like what sense it is that the poem creates when it does that.
Yeah.
Like it creates an extra beat of like a sense of silence that's still within the poem. But I don't know how to describe the feeling very well. But maybe you guys can let me know. Yeah, we also have I'm Nobody, Who Are You? I mean, after a great pain, a formal feeling comes, right? That's a great one.
Yeah, and as we get into...
We're going to get all the great ones here, you know. I'll tell you how the sun rose, which is like a really... To me, that first line is funny and like aggressive and like playing in the tradition of the Aubade, right? An address to the sun, except it's not an address to the sun. It's like about, it's about the sun coming up. I'll tell you how the sun rose. Like, it's just funny. Because it feels like a funny statement.
Yeah, and then we get into this kind of, like I said, right around page 150, and this is when we start to merge into 1862. So her most productive year, but if we're going by those little packets that were laid out in the intro, So, yeah, 1862, she had a packet of 320 or 366 poems in that little thing.
And these are poems she did send to Higginson, right?
Yeah,
and they
some of
sort
them
of come in this short little burst, right? Because we get those few poems, many of those few poems, like within a few poems of each other.
Yeah. And this is when we start to get, like we already talked about, like banger after banger kind of thing. It starts to really click. And not everything all at once, but then when I got to page around, like, 191 is what I marked, into the 400s of her numbered poems here, I started to really pick up on this kind of, where did I mark it? Yeah, 401, you know, what soft cherubic creatures these gentlewomen are. Like there, I started to see, okay, this poem is great. And then, 402, 403 are okay. And then you get like 404, 406, 410, 411, 412, like 413. Like it just starts to become these bangers. Like I just couldn't, and my excitement started growing. I was like, damn, and this is where we're going to, we're going to talk about this a little bit. Then we keep going on next episode, listeners. But like, yeah. The big ones, 412, 413, 401. Did you have any in that area?
I mean, yeah, I circled all of them. I'm kind of, I guess, getting to the end of time here. I say we sort of just pick up on this section. Let's see, it looks like I have 412 and 413 circled.
Oh, yeah, those are really good. And this is getting to the end of those first 200 pages that we blocked off, listeners, to kind of make this more manageable in podcast form. But yeah, and we're in 1862 again. She's contacting Higginson now. She's contacting, seeing if she's worth a damn kind of thing, and the poems are just getting better and better. My last question here before we sign off, and we'll talk about this, I think, in subsequent episodes coming up, but the whole her not publishing during her lifetime thing, do we think that helped her or hurt her, or both? And I'm thinking, I'm thinking of the edits and things that people put into her work after her death. I'm thinking of what the world was deprived of because she didn't really publish during her lifetime much.
But we also know that she didn't completely hide her shit from the world, right? Like she shared poems with other people, but I mean, I think it probably mostly, it's impossible to say, but I think it probably mostly helped. I think that's probably what led to her staying as who we think of as a really original poet because of the lack of outside external pressure, right? And saying, no, you should do this. And that even, in fact, when that did happen, when Higginson did say, no, let's change this and let's change this, she responded unkindly to that. And she said, fuck no, you're wrong, basically. Like, these are my poems. And that I think that, it was such a spiritual and a private act for her. It was like a sacred thing to her. And the idea that someone would change, would create change in one of her poems as they were really actually bothered her, which is interesting to think about because she was looking for an answer as to whether her poems, again, were true, if they could breathe, if, which, maybe puts us at odds with the idea that she didn't have an outside influence, right? Because, she probably did read. We know that she read other, probably other poets, right?
She got the magazines. There was a thing in Vendler's thing where, yes, she was
and they might
subscribing
not be
to the Atlantic.
known,
she was subscribing to the New Yorker. She was subscribing to these magazines that were publishing the hottest shit, these old magazines that a lot of them are still around, right? I think probably some European ones. I'm sure she could read French and Latin and things like this. A lot of educated upper class people could back then, even though, Not many can.
But yeah,
now,
I would say, you know, we have the Dickinson we have because she didn't have much editorial influence.
I think that, and I think it added some type of mystery to her. The fact that it was all this stuff to be discovered and she was dead, so we couldn't ask her. And it created this kind of, you know, we romanticize great artists all the time. And I think there's a place for that. You know, you guys will hear me rail against it on this podcast when it's overdone. But like, yeah, I think there always is that kind of element of mystery to that elevates an artist to that kind of level of immortality, right? You see this with Shakespeare even, you know. We don't know a whole lot about his life. You know, records are hard to come by and all that kind of stuff, but, you know, there's all that shit. But all right, you're out of time. Yeah, but I mean, that's a good place. I mean, we did 2.5 hours here.
Yeah, I say, you know, we pick up around there, so.
All right. Reminder to listeners, we're still looking for workshop horror stories. If you or someone you know had a terrible experience in a workshop, we'd like to hear about it in excruciating detail. Send that into heavyboardpodcast@gmail.com. We also have a subscription plan to subscribe and receive full uncensored episodes for subscribers only, including bonus episodes, extra segments, all that. Go to patreon.com/heavyboard to subscribe. If you don't want to do that, can't afford that, there are other ways to support us. You can support us on you can support us by leaving us a 5-star review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. That helps us out, helps us grow. It's free. Or you could go to one of our YouTube channels, both of our YouTube channels, give us a like, a subscribe, share it with your friends and family. That helps us grow. And of course, we will have links to all the books that we covered in the description. That includes the complete Dickinson poems and the Vendler we kept referencing. And next episode, we are continuing on our Dickinson deep dive. Emily Dickinson Complete Poems, Part 2. This has been Heavy Board. See ya.
Heavy. Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say male is entirely hostile. No! You know,
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so. Are you radioactive now?
Inner.
Resources, American resources.
Being bored?
You know, some activities are intentional, right?
It shows such a lack
Heavy.
of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I
Heavy.
should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.